All right, friends, if we can just go down the line here, and if you can introduce yourselves in your own words and tell the people who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Tom Burchill. I oversee the programmatic media buying team for Monks mid-market and performance business. I've been in programmatic for like 12 years now, just all media buying stuff. Before Monks, I was at Xaxis for quite a while, and it's been a pretty exciting time to be in that industry. I think there's been a lot of change.
My name is Kelli Hashimoto. I lead media strategy and execution at Media 2 for a number of our clients just in retail, B2B, tourism, just to name a few verticals. I've been there for about 10 years in the programmatic space for probably about 12 now.
Awesome. Hey everyone, Skyler McGill, coming from LA representing Wpromote, and I look after our programmatic, site direct, and traditional media buying teams. And so we're a team that is really unique and sitting in the intersection of the media landscape today, and really pride ourselves, our philosophy around being the challenger agency and how do we drive measurable, predictive outcomes for the brands that we work with. So really excited for our discussion today.
Yeah, all right, so we're going to talk about the next wave of channels, right? So let's kick things off by talking about what you're most excited about. What are the channels that are really bringing you joy in this moment? And Sky, as the challenger agency, self-described, I'm going to put you in the hot seat. What's got you moving?
Yeah, so there's certainly a lot of channels that I'm really excited about, and I think it's an evolution of what we're familiar with today when you look at channels like digital out of home, for example, and how we can really build authentic moments to meet people in the real world, essentially. And so I think that's so critical today. And then looking at CTV, for example, and the evolution that's happening there around measurement. And we all know as marketers in the room, it's never been more challenging, I think, when we face issues around fragmentation, transparency, pricing pressure. And so there's a lot that I'm excited about and looking forward to in terms of everyone in this room continuing to move the needle to improve that, the allowance that we get from being able to drive measurable outcomes with CTV. And then lastly, retail media. Retail media is certainly a gold rush right now, and so I think there's so much opportunity in terms of closing the loop within retail media networks, and then also on the supply front, and again, really reaching consumers where they're spending their time shopping. So those are probably the core 3 channels that I'm looking forward to right now.
Kelly, Tom, what are you guys really excited about? Same thing, something different?
I would say a lot of the same thing. I would actually also add programmatic audio. I think it's come a long way in terms of scale and even some of the control that we now have as buyers.
To build on what Skyler was saying on the retail media side, I do think that's an area where I'm really sort of excited about the development that's happening, not just because of the retail aspect of it, but because of the sort of like marketplaces expansion of it. So we've started seeing a lot of businesses, marketplaces, anywhere where there's some transactional relationship, starting to come to market with data offerings and supply offerings. So like JP Morgan rolled one out, about a year ago. I think everybody here is probably aware of like the United Airlines offering. So it's not just retail anymore, which is pretty cool. And I think that we're headed into a direction where there will be, advertiser relationships or like ad tech based capabilities for a lot of these recognizable brands over time, and navigating that is pretty exciting. It offers us a lot of cool capability, direct addressability, and just a better way to be more confident about reaching who we think the best target audiences are, wherever they're doing their transactional daily lives.
Yeah. All right, so Tom, let's undercut your excitement. How do you separate out the hype for a new channel or something emerging, something that's really exciting and innovative, from what you think will actually provide real incremental value? What is your approach to drawing those lines?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in the performance world, overseeing a programmatic team that lives pretty squarely in direct response, traditional like ROAS based performance, incrementality is the key to everything. And it's all about how we're defining that. So a lot of our clients on the mid-market side don't necessarily have the resources to employ larger, third-party solutions like an MMM or an MTA solution. So a lot of the time, we're just building sort of like more manual types of incrementality tests into our campaign structure. So we might do a geo holdout on a new activation for a few months to try and prove out, are we seeing branded search volume lift where we have this thing live, right? And that's, for us, like that's a big part of trying to justify the actual value behind these things and not just throwing some cool stuff in there because it's cool.
Yeah. Kelly, I'm gonna put you in the hot seat because I think from our original conversation when we were talking about this panel, you were the most reluctant of like believing in a channel right away and like taking some time to really understand it. So how do you separate that out?
Yeah, I've actually thought about this since I said it because I think a better way, not to jump ahead to that question, but I think a better way to put it is I think that there is still a lot of room to make your existing channels work better and harder, I would say, than adding new channels into the mix. I think client education really is a huge part of that because a lot of times they don't understand that. So, it's balancing where can we test the shiny objects, but also still focus on like maturing your existing programs.
And anything to add, Tom? Or Sky, sorry.
Yeah, no, so I think, building on what Tom was saying, incrementality is critical, especially around geo-testing and match market testing, but taking it a step further, finding ways that you can bring forward MMM, but not just what we may be accustomed to, where MMM models can be heavily reliant on historical data, but building something that's really high velocity for brands. I think that's really critical and what brands are looking for, and we have to move away from measurement of last touch attribution. Certainly last click obviously has been so archaic, and so I think it's for this channel it's important to be able to manufacture those systems and relentlessly test. I think that's another critical aspect. There's no way we're going to know if something's going to be effective for the business or driving the right outcomes if we don't set aside budget and design to allow us to do that.
All right, so let's dig into some of that data. What are the quant and qual signals that you're looking at when you're evaluating the health of a new channel offering?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, there's a few core pillars. I think one, certainly looking at from an audience perspective, what's the quality of the audience data and how is engagement really driving the outcomes that we're looking for? And so we're monitoring that very closely. So of course, reach metrics, costs, other attention metrics as well that we can layer in for especially a lot of the emerging channels we've been talking about. And then beyond that, I think there's other methods as well, looking at creative resonance. How can we be refreshing our creative messaging in real time and thinking about customization around that? And those are key things like up the funnel. And then of course, measuring a lot of things on the DR side with pixels and some of the tools that we just mentioned. Those are many ways that we're looking at that.
Yeah. Kelly, Tom, anything you'd like to add?
I asked ChatGPT if it's working, and no, just kidding. No, I think a lot of what I was saying before, which is looking at what is the lift on other channels outside of programmatic when you have whatever it is you're testing live in a certain market or with a certain audience. So are we seeing, again, like branded search lift is a really big one for us. We generally like to see that people are starting to search for your brand more in a place where we've got a new CTV activation or whatever live. I think there's a lot of interplay with sort of like the broader marketing scope in that type of measurement, and I think a big part of that is really just having the discussions with teams outside of your programmatic operators, right? So again, talking to the search team, talking to the social team, what's going on with them, how has performance been trending, what are the things that they care about on the site, when you're driving users back to an advertiser's owned property, and just seeing how the media that you have live is affecting all of those different factors.
No, they hit on it.
They hit on it all. Okay, all right. Well, so then Kelly, we'll kick you off on the next one. How do you look at and assess the incrementality of these channels, and how do you vet out the cannibalization that can occur with your existing audiences and your existing programs?
Definitely. I think that to what Tom was talking about earlier, there's geo holdouts, I would say audience holdouts. I think in terms of testing any new channel, that is where it's our responsibility to have the structure in place to really make sure that we're setting the test up for success. So, if you don't have the structure to really say, I didn't have a control group, so I don't know how this performed, I would say that is the first and foremost. So that is looking at not only audience overlap, but I would actually say like transparency gaps and then reporting gaps. Because I think with a lot of these new channels, they're not totally caught up on the measurement aspect. I think they're getting there and they're improving, every day. But I think there are still a lot of gaps from that standpoint.
And are you finding that across all of these channels that we've talked about, RMNs to, CTV and so on? Is there a variation across?
I would say they're evolving at different rates, but the gap that has always kind of been there with all of them, I would say, is translating any of these media metrics into the business goals. And even getting clients to understand it from that standpoint is also a whole gap.
Totally. Sky, Tom, anything to add?
I think building on that a little bit, one of the places where you have to be the most careful with cannibalization, especially over the last couple years in all things programmatic, is with other paid media practices, again, like outside of programmatic. So, YouTube is like a pretty classic example of this. Like you can activate YouTube through Google Ads, you can activate it through DV360. Retail media networks, marketplaces are starting, like that is in and of itself, when you're talking about like endemic supply, like an endemic search function. So these are things that it's really hard to start to put things into different corners of this team activates this team activates this other thing. This is why we do this in this platform versus this other platform. And I think you have to be really deliberate as an agency, as a media buyer, and if you're building these capabilities on like, what is our POV? Why do we do this particular thing in this particular way on this particular platform? So a little bit of a vagueness there, but like, again, overlapping these channels is something that I think is, you have to really make the decision on like why you're doing something a certain way.
Yeah, and I think, again, like our approach is when we talk about being a challenger agency, it's really breaking down silos within teams, and then also unification of data and having the right data layers in place and a strong data taxonomy, I think is so important, especially when we're measuring audiences from an omni-channel standpoint and cross-functionally. And so having the right tools in place to allow you to do that on an ongoing basis and then optimize campaigns effectively throughout the flight versus waiting a couple months for a lift study to come back or potentially a more outdated model that you're using in your MMM or MTA. That is almost dead in the water essentially if you don't have the infrastructure set up from the get-go.
Yeah, so can you build on that a bit? Like how are you normalizing data coming in from these disparate channels, some of them non-traditional channels that we're plugging programmatic into to feed into your MMM, into your MMA?
Yeah, so we've built our own proprietary technology. So essentially we're taking in and funneling a ton of data, large swaths of data with API integrations from all the major platforms and even traditional practices as well, looking at post-log data and log-level data on the biddable side, so then we can ingest everything and then segment it appropriately and then measure that, as I mentioned, ongoing. So I think that is so important, and to have that, being able to build your data lake as a brand and first-party data effectively and having a way to segment that is really the foundation for everything before you can put media into market.
I guess what I would also add on to this is, as we talk about incrementality, I think a lot of, MMMs and MTAs are more, I would say, long-term, but incrementality is something that has to be regularly tested and built into your process. So when you do these audience or geo holdouts, it's not a one-time thing, but it should be a regular cadence, and I would say like that helps to normalize it.
Got it. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. Like the readouts are slow. It's really hard to get value and to like change course based on an MMM readout that you're getting like once a quarter. So I think just same general answer, which is you need to supplement that with some sort of real-time data that you're optimizing against that can translate or like run in parallel with the results that you're expecting to get from a more comprehensive attribution platform.
Yeah, so sometimes there's latency. There's also sometimes data gaps with these newer channels, right? Where you're not getting the full suite of touch points that you would want. How do you mitigate that? How do you navigate the walled gardens that are out there, the nascent platforms that maybe have a cool offering, but it doesn't quite give you what you need to satisfy your normal reporting conditions?
Yeah, it's really tough. I think you try and find some sort of proxy. So whatever it is where you can get the most frequent readout, real time is obviously always best because again, optimization and blah, blah, blah. But if I'm running with, we do a lot of B2B on my team, so we run a lot of like publisher direct for like very specific industry publications. If we can only get some sort of idea of like the engagement and like lead generation that's coming from that on a weekly basis, great, we'll take whatever we can get and try and use that directionally until we can get, again, a more comprehensive readout on an MTA or an MMM.
Yeah. So kind of like what Barb was even just saying of like, don't wait for it to be perfect. It's good enough, build as you go.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. Anything to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly think it's an art and science, and going back, sort of the notion that I made, it's so difficult being a marketer today, given the fragmentation and the walled garden aspect of things. I think really you just have to run with what you have and know that that's the new normal in the industry that we're in, and build tools around that to allow you to be successful and at least get enough signal to make a very educated decision on the business. So I think that's all we can do, and again, having the infrastructure in place from the get-go is critical.
Yeah, I would actually add that no single view is going to be perfect, so having multiple signals is actually more helpful, especially when there are so many gaps.
Got it. So when you're collecting some of this data and you're looking at evaluating, reporting out on it, are there specific channel nuances when we talk about this new inventory with like digital out of home, with RMNs, with CTV, with programmatic audio? Is the consumption habit of consumers different in a way that forces you to reevaluate the metrics that you look at?
I don't know that, I think that there are some cases where the difference in like the consumption of the media changes how you would plan things. And I think that's really true for like any media channel and any paid media practice. What I'm usually more concerned about, and I think like my team is usually more concerned about, is what the supply landscape looks like. So you mentioned like CTV versus digital out of home. Those are two like vastly different supply sets in the sense of like how they're organized. So in digital out of home, you have a lot of like really regional, publishers that own, let's say, all of the inventory in like this specific airport or whatever. That's really different than working with, trying to put together some strategy in CTV and being like directly interfacing with, massive networks that we're all really familiar with, and trying to build some like the most direct path to that supply as you possibly can. So I think that's a really big part of it, is like as you're starting to get more familiar with and activate on new channels, trying to really understand like what the ownership of that content actually looks like, and playing to the strengths of that wherever you can.
Yeah, and I would say, I think consolidation is always the name of the game. So any way that we can bring in, as many formats as possible where it makes sense into one buying platform to be able to measure holistically reach and frequency and performance goals, if you have them, is really important. And I think where we have an opportunity to do that, where it's not always the case, like sometimes you might need to be going to another partner potentially to access certain inventory. To your point, Tom, around the supply front is really critical to think about that around consumption, and the buying doors allow us to get there. But ultimately, if we're able to bring in that data and be able to look at it holistically, we're going to have a better chance of making informed decisions on how we're driving outcomes for the business.
Cool. All right, so Kelly, I feel like I've maybe pigeonholed you as the skeptic on the panel, but that's okay. We're
That's
gonna roll
okay.
with it.
I'll take that.
So once a channel has finally won you over, like you're bought in, you're like, okay, I'm willing to put a test budget against this, or I'm willing to start scaling it out. How do you approach that scale to retain those efficiencies, or what you saw in that original test that gave you hope? How do you approach the actual implementation of that channel at scale?
tough question. I would say it kind of depends on the channel and for the client. So depending on how much budget and room they have in their program is a huge piece of that. I would say, let's just say they have the capability to scale. I think doing it well is the most important. So that is being, you know, if it's successful, we're assuming that it's fully transparent and it's measurable. But you know, we can speak to keeping it fresh on creative, and that might fall back on, for us, we only do media, so our clients handle the creative. So a lot of times that's where it kind of falls apart a little bit, because that is how you need to scale some of these channels. I think with any of them, like digital out of home, CTV, even programmatic audio, they need to be pretty great on the creative front because they're so visible. So I would say like that is the most important to us when it comes to scaling them.
Yeah. Tom, Skyler, any other guidance on scaling these out?
I would just say time. I think time is a key word, allowing your media and your campaigns to you know, collect enough data to drive outcomes, and then being able to understand how to iterate from that. So often, again, especially in the market that we're in, there's so many pressures macroeconomically, brands are very quick to you know, shut off a channel that could be very incremental for their business if we were able to run, let's say, an extra 3 to 4 weeks to get the right insights that we need. And so I always caution that. I think really having, again, a relentless testing framework in mind, knowing the milestones you need to hit to get there, and sticking to that game plan is really important.
Cool. Where I think I want to end this panel on is a bit of a juicy question. So as you think about these new channels that are coming in, not just the ones we have today, but the ones that might be on the horizon, do you have what you need? Or are there changes in talent, in your expertise, in your actual infrastructure that needs to move or shift in some way to enable you to capture that growth as it surfaces?
That is a great question. I think that there's a lot of change coming. Me personally, I don't know if it's that we don't have what we need. Like, you know, in general, I think all of these channels are accessible, and we're able to make sense of them for the most part in a way that, like, we've been able to understand programmatic media buying for a long time with more traditional programmatic channels. But we were talking about the overlap between, you know, what is programmatic sort of spreading out into other paid media practices. Again, I think that's going to require a lot of adaptability on the part of media buyers to start to, like, really understand how they should be working with the non-programmatic world, and getting used to some of the, you know, background knowledge and wisdom of where some of those overlapping channels have come from in the past. I also think, not to, like, drop the AI bomb or whatever, but I also think that, like, there's a lot of AI change that's coming to the programmatic world.
Well, we've already established that all of your measurement is you just asking ChatGPT.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
so I'll just keep doing that, and I guess I'm good, but, you know.
Yeah, I would add that it kind of goes both internal and external. So on the internal side, everything that Tom said, like, buyers are no longer just buyers. Buyers have to understand the data. They have to understand AI. There's always changes in the platform. So I think as a buyer, it's just evolving, I would say, the skill set. And then externally, a big thing that I think is missing is still the client buy-in to, you know, like, giving it time. Like, why is something actually performing? Or, like, can we invest? Or, like, what are we investing in? I think that's still a huge gap.
Yeah, echoing Tom and Kelly, I think the future media buyer is going to be one that is incredibly holistic and has their hands, you know, around more strategy, more planning, more audience design than ever before, and using AI as a co-pilot. I mean, we've been talking a lot about hybrid intelligence at our organization, and how important that is going to be for the next generation of marketers to really architect your ability to use AI in a co-pilot sense to your advantage, essentially. So those are things that we've been looking at in terms of the evolution of the organization.
Love it. All right, well, thank you three. Now we're going to turn it over to the crowd. Folks, you got a panel of experts on nascent inventory and channels and spaces. What questions do you have?
Hi. My name is Amit Grover. I'm from Redfin, based here in San Francisco. So you mentioned time and AI. I could see AI potentially shortcutting the time. You know, you can ingest a lot more data. You could potentially analyze every bid request and see if it works. But do you also see it kind of overcomplicating the issue? The marketer could be, have less patience, like, oh, we can kind of get to a result faster, and it just overcomplicates it in a way. Do you think about that?
Yeah, I can take that one first. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always going to be, again, maybe it's a little bit naive today, obviously with the proliferation of AI, but I do think there's going to be a human element to the decisioning that's happening in the bid stream, especially with programmatic media and how complex it is. And to your point, I do think AI can get us to certain outcomes a lot faster, but it's ultimately important to not over-engineer the outcomes that we're trying to drive for the business. And so I think having, again, frameworks in place of data ingestion and not overwhelming it to a sense where you're not really having clear guidance on what next step to take or what's the next best dollar that I should invest in the channel or another channel is something to be considered, and where I think the human element in media buying is really important still.
Yeah, I would also add, when we look at a lot of these channels, I think the reason why time really comes into play a lot more is because these have like a bit of a longer window before you actually see some of that performance, and sometimes the clients are coming from more of a DR background, so they're used to seeing those results right away.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the time aspect for me is becoming more about the time it takes like a user or an audience to do whatever it is you're hoping they're going to do after X amount of exposure, versus, to your point, on making the time to get to some sort of like conclusion in a reporting sense a lot faster and requiring a lot less data. And there are already like MTAs and MMMs out there that are starting to do that, which is really exciting.
Awesome. One more question over here.
Barb again, hi. I'm so curious as to the conversation around MMM. What I'm finding with my clients is we're trying new exciting things. We're seeing great efficiencies in flight, and then MMM is just pooping all over it. Post, and they're like, no, we don't want to do that. We're like, maybe it's the MMM that's wrong. And so have you experienced the same thing, and how do you talk your client off that ledge of like still wanting to try new things and maybe using MMM a little bit more directionally than saying it's our absolute source of truth?
What the saying is, I think all models are wrong, some are useful, or whatever. I like to sort of live by that. I think you take what you can out of those and use them directionally for whatever is like an actually useful purpose to get to a more efficient outcome, or whatever. And I think it can sort of convolute what you're seeing on a regular basis in the campaign or in your media buy, but there's a flip side to that, which is that oftentimes channels that would show like absolutely no value on a regular basis, you can get a more hopefully accurate view of them on that slower readout. So like one that comes to mind for me is we find really consistently that audio doesn't do that well in like any of our day-to-day reporting functions that we would pull from a third-party ad server or from any DSP. Does really well in MTA. So it helps us to tell that story, and we try to sort of use that to guide our advertisers with the data that is hopefully the most useful. But we don't necessarily live or die by whatever the readout results are.
Awesome. Tom Burchill, Kelli Hashimoto, Skyler McGill, thank you so much.